Story time about how my best friend outed me on purpose. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. My ex-best friend and I have known each other for 10 years. The problem is we come from very different backgrounds. Her parents are super liberal. She got a tattoo when she was 15. Her parents took her to get the tattoo. They've given her all the freedom in the world. My parents are the opposite, super strict and religious. I knew I liked girls from the age of 8 years old. Watched a movie with Jessica Alba. Need I say more? I knew that this was going to be hard for my parents. But that's when I decided I would never tell them. I would just wait to move out and date whoever I wanted. But my best friend thought differently. When I was 13, I came out to her parents. They were incredibly supportive. They even gave me the birds and the bees talk. Parents were basically like my parents. When I turned 16, my parents wanted to have a formal gathering. You see, we're from the South, a place where debutante balls still exist. Parents at the time were trying to force me, and I'm serious, they were forcing me to date a boy. It would be kind of like an arranged marriage. Comes from a rich political family, so we were the perfect match. At my coming out party, parents were forcing me to dance with this boy. Dance with him for a song, then took me to the backyard and forcefully tried to kiss me. Out of nowhere, he started fondling me. Then he told me that I was his and that my parents want us to get married. Part 2. Story time about how my best friend outed me on purpose. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. That's when my best friend in the middle of the party yells out, "She's gay and you don't even know it." My dad grabbed me by the arm and pulled me into the kitchen. That's when he said, "What is that about?" And I just started crying. This was literally something I was never, ever, ever going to tell my parents. I did not want them to know that I was gay. My mom starts crying too. And that's when my dad starts crying too. That's when my mom says, "I've known it all this time." Then they started asking me why I was doing this to them, why I was being such a bad daughter. That's when my best friend and her parents come into the kitchen and they told my parents that everybody should just go home. They told all the guests to leave, and then my best friend took me to her house. Guess what? My parents didn't want to speak to me after that. They reproached me every single day. They even wanted to send me to a camp to get rehabilitated. Of course I said no. Oh yeah, and remember the boy they promised me to? My parents invited him and his parents over for dinner, and this guy tried to kiss me again. He got me alone in the laundry room and literally went to town. I pushed him away and threatened him. This guy's literally crazy. As soon as I turned 18, I moved out. My parents don't really speak to me. And I broke up with my bestie. She's always begging me to forgive her. Should I? Story time about how my best friend outed me on purpose. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. After this boy forced me to kiss him and then tried to fondle me, told me that he and I were going to get married because my parents told him. Just keep in mind, I'm 16 at the time. So while my parents are trying to keep me away from bad influences, they are throwing me into the arms of a boy who's literally harassed me. At my coming out party, told him to never touch me again. I ran back into the party and he chased me. Finally went up to my parents and told them what happened. That's when my father sided with the boy. He said that we were going to get married. So it was all true. My bestie and her parents were at the party. They could hear what I was telling my dad. I'm obviously in tears at this point. I mean, I just got harassed at my party, and my parents don't want to do anything about it. It's like this kid has permission to do whatever he wants because we're gonna get married. My best friend came up to my parents and told them that she needed to talk to them, and I knew right away what she was gonna try to say. I pulled her away and told her to just leave it, that I would handle the situation on my own. And trust me, I understand where she was coming from because she loves me, but she had no right to do what she did next. I asked my parents to tell the guests to leave, but no, we had to keep up appearances. And my bestie yells out, "She's gay and you don't even know it." Part 3 is story time about when I was sexually assaulted at the strip club that I was working at by a known DRUG person. A long time ago, I was working at a strip club as a cocktail waitress, and this was a job that I actually really liked. I was surrounded by queens. Like, the dancers were amazing, the other cocktail waitresses were amazing. I was trusting of everyone that went there, including all the men that went there. I had really good guys that would come in and like give me a lot of tips, and basically I would just talk to them and give them my companionship. Their cocktail waitresses had this very special client who would only come to see her and a couple of the dancers. Now, this man was a scary looking guy, and we all knew what he did, and it was, you know, involved in DRUG. I was so scared of this man that I would never, like, ever go near the table. So one day the cocktail waitress comes up to me and says, "Hey, my client over here wants you to serve him tonight." She's like, "He's really good. He's gonna tip you like $100 every time you bring him a drink." So all she kept saying to me was, "Be nice." How effed up is that she knew what was gonna happen? As soon as he sees me, he grabs my hand and sits me down next to him and says, "I want you to bring me 2 Cokes and then whatever his chicken order was, I don't know. I'll grab the drinks and the chicken and I come back." And then again, he sits me down right next to him. This man pulls out $400 and stuffs it into my bra. This is where I'm like, okay, Esther, just be nice. Don't get upset, you know, chill out. It's $400. At the time, I was engaged to this guy. I'm not even gonna say his name. He knows who he is. We'd been engaged for maybe 4 months at that time, or maybe even less. And my fiance at the time barely had a job. Like, he worked at AMC and made $8 an hour, and I would ask him consistently, like constantly all the time, like, "Can you please get a better job? Like, or at least get a second job." You guys, I had 3 jobs at the time, and I was literally paying for everything. I grabbed the $400 and I think I'm gonna walk away. Once again, he stops me from leaving the table, and then he grabs my coochie. Like, with this whole hand, he grabbed it. Then he tried to put a finger in. I pushed him, and he grabbed my face like this and shoved his tongue down my throat, like all the way down. Like I could feel his tongue back here too. It was disgusting. By the way, there are people literally in the tables next to us watching what's happening and no one's doing a thing. Sorry, go to part 2. Story time about how I was sexually assaulted at the strip club that I was working at by a well-known DRUG person. At this point, he's got his tongue down my throat and he's like extremely aggressive, grabbing me super hard by the shoulders and the face, and I can't get away. I actually physically cannot get away from this man. And he grabs my butt, he grabs every single part of me, okay? Just gives me the disgusting. I finally get him to let go of me and I run away. Like, what else is there left for me to do? I literally run. I run to a bodyguard who's one of my, I would have considered him one of my friends at the club. I start telling this guy everything. It just happened. I think he even might have seen something. And he's like, okay, just go to the back and try to relax. He's like, don't make a scene. I go to the back, and the first person I see is the waitress who told me to go serve him. And I say to her, I can't believe you let me go serve him without telling me what he was planning on doing. Then I started crying because I was extremely angry, and I said to her, because he lets you do that, he thinks he can do that to all of us. You should have told me what I was getting myself into. Then she looks at me and she's like, what are you talking about? What happened? What did he do? Tell me. Like, she's trying to get me to spill tea. Like something funny just happened. She's like, oh my God, tell me. This is the saddest part of the whole story. The manager comes over to me and says, there's nothing we can do about it. He's really powerful. We can't do anything. My grandma's soap opera is in the back, and I'm holding back tears because she's sitting right there. I'm trying to film as much as I can in her room just to spend time with her. But it's the most dramatic Turkish soap opera ever. So they tell me they can't do anything about it. Call out every single day after that. I don't go back for like a week and a half. And the night that I get home and I tell my fiance at the time what happened, he looks at me and he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. He gave me a hug. By the way, my fiance at the time was a model and he had been sexually harassed, so I thought he would understand. Following day, when it's time for me to get ready to go to work, he's like, what are you doing? Because I'm laying on the couch, literally laying on the couch crying. And I say, I'm not going to go back. And he's like, what do you mean you're not going to go back? Why? Because he's more concerned that I'm not going to have the money to pay for that month's rent or his bills or his student loans, because I was paying his student fucking loans. He looks at me and he says, you need to get over it. I cried for days. When I did go back to the strip club, I thought that I'd be able to stay there, but I realized none of the girls had anything to say to me. I started asking them, like, have you experienced something like this with him? They all kept saying no, and they all kept denying it. That's when I started feeling like they were no longer including me in anything because I was like the black sheep. I finally did go back to the strip club. I broke up with my fiance 2 days after that. And 2 days after that, I met my crazy ex, who I started seeing right after that. I'll do a story time on that. Story time about how my husband keeps borrowing money from me and now wants access to my bank accounts. What should I do? Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's not on my Instagram. My husband and I have been married for 6 years. When we first got married, we were really young, so we were living with our parents. We didn't actually move out from my parents' house up until 2 years ago. In fact, I don't think we're actually adults yet. We both still act like we're teenagers. I'm 24 and he's 25. I recently got myself a really good job. He, on the other hand, has never had a really good job. He does a lot of odd jobs here and there, a lot of catering. He also models because he's extremely good looking. So now that I got myself a job, I wanted to get my own apartment. But of course, I have to include my husband because we're married. He actually ended up getting an okay job. We decided to split the rent and everything was going fine. But then he got laid off and this is when things started going bad. He started asking me for money because he wasn't getting paid anymore. Every now and then he would ask me for like $10 or he would ask me for my debit card. At first it was just small purchases like going to the supermarket or going to Starbucks. So I gave him my card. One day I'm checking my bank account and I realized that he bought himself a $600 watch. You'll never guess what he said when I confronted him. Part 2 is story time about how my husband keeps borrowing money from me and now wants access to my accounts. What should I do? Disclaimer, it's not my story time. Send me on Instagram. When I confronted him about buying a $600 watch with my money, he told me that he has every single right to use my money as much as I do. And even though I'm the one earning the money, he is my husband, so he can do whatever he wants with it. I got so angry I picked up one of my crystals and threw it right at his head. Luckily it missed him, but it did scratch his ear. He went berserk and accused me of trying to kill him. He ran over to the ER with a scratch on his ear. I went straight to my parents' house and I told them what was happening. Obviously my parents agree with me that he should not be spending $600 of my money on a stupid watch. And they told me to take away any access he had to my money. So I took away my debit card and my credit card from him. We both ended up apologizing to each other, so for a few months it was okay. He had a few jobs, so he had some spending money for himself. But then he got fired again. That's when he asked me politely to add him to my bank account so that he could get his own debit card from my account. To be honest, at first I thought it was okay. But I didn't say yes or no. I called my parents and they told me absolutely not. And when I told my husband, he threatened to divorce me. He says that I'm neglecting his needs. Part 3 is caught my influencer boyfriend DMing girls on Instagram. And I just found out I'm pregnant. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sending me on Instagram. Influencer boyfriend is kind of famous on TikTok. See, he's one of those pretty boys. He and I have been together for 6 months. I started showing up in his videos a couple of years ago. And I knew that I liked him ever since then. But he never wanted to be exclusive because he wanted to be an F-boy. I let it happen. Let him use me. But after a while, I told him that I needed something more. It was like pulling teeth out of his mouth to get him to go exclusive with me. We've been living together, and 4 weeks ago we found out I was pregnant. He was actually happier than I was, which surprised me. But out of nowhere, I got a DM from a random girl, and her DM read, "Girl to girl, I don't think this is right. I'm sorry to be the one to show you this. Here's the DM your boyfriend sent me." His DM to her said, "Girl, you must be tired because you've been running around my mind all day. LOL." I literally had secondhand embarrassment, but I was crushed. At this point, he had joked around about maybe putting a ring on it. Now I knew that he might possibly be talking to girls, not after he found out that I was pregnant. I want to blast him on the internet so bad, but I depend on him financially. My best friend doesn't want me to tell him anything. He wants me to pretend like it didn't happen, because if we break up, he has no financial obligation towards me. I think she might be right. If we broke up, he'd probably kick me out of his house, take away my car, and stop giving me money. I give this man the wifey treatment. I do everything for him. Should I confront him? Self-care sister. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I come from a really big family. My mom has 5 sisters and 1 brother, and my dad has 4 brothers and sisters. All of them have their own kids, so I have a lot of cousins. And this means we have a lot of family get-togethers. Every single weekend, someone is hosting a party. We all get together and eat, and it's actually a really nice time. But there's always that one creepy uncle. In my case, it's my mom's brother. He's 46-year-old and has never married, but he's a bachelor. He's got money, so he basically has a bunch of sugar babies. Whenever my family tells him that he needs to get married, he says he'll never get married to anybody. He thinks women only exist for the pleasure of men. When I turned 16, I noticed that he would stare at me a lot. At first, it was just staring. Every now and again, he never did anything really creepy then, but just the staring was enough for me. I never told my mom about it then, not until I turned 18. This is when he started making comments like, "Wow, you're growing into your body," or "Wow, you got great hips." He would make comments about how I was growing up, like, "Ew." He even told my dad that he needed to keep me away from guys because I was growing up really quickly. And because of my curves, men would think that I was a woman. This is when I finally told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable. She thought it was funny at first, so I avoided him at all costs. Part 2. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's me on Instagram. When I told my mom that he was making me super uncomfortable, she laughed it off. She thought it was funny. She said, "Oh, you know how he is." So from that point on, I basically avoided my uncle every time we were at a family event. When I turned 20, this is when things got even worse. He would ask me things like if I was a virgin, or if I had a boyfriend, if I had ever been on dates. And one time he even told me that he would get very jealous if I ended up bringing a guy to one of our family events. One time he complimented me on the dress that I was wearing, so after that, I only wore baggy clothes to family events. The fact that I had to change the way that I dress so that he could control himself makes me sick. I finally told my mom again that my uncle was always bothering me. It's when she told me that the world is filled with men like him, and that all I needed to do was just ignore him. So I told my dad everything. My dad took it a little more seriously and told my uncle that he needed to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed. Part 3 is up. Story time about how my creepy uncle flirts with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. I finally told my dad and he told my uncle to stop making comments. My uncle just laughed and told my dad that he was overreacting, and that all he said to me was that I was a pretty girl. What a liar. In part 1 and 2, I told you guys that it was getting worse, but here's where it actually gets even worse. Like I said, I have a really big family, so my cousins are growing up too. One of them just turned 13, and my uncle cannot stop staring at her. She's maturing a lot quicker than most 13-year-olds. He's already staring at her. So here's what I did. At the next family event, I sat right next to him. Every time he would stare at one of my cousins or try to make a comment at me, I called him out for it in front of everybody. I even recorded the things that he said. The fact that I even have to do this at a family event makes me sick. Instead of enjoying my time with my family, I have to sit next to my creepy uncle policing him. Anyway, it's totally worth it though. I'm making sure that my cousins don't feel uncomfortable. After I had enough recordings of him saying nasty things, at the next family event, I showed it to my grandma. I basically played it for the entire family. My grandma told him that he couldn't come to any more events if he was going to behave that way. And of course, he apologized to everyone right away. But not to me, he apologized to my dad. After his half-ass apology, he was let back into family events. I don't think that's enough punishment. Give me some ideas because I think I deserve justice. Creepy uncle. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I don't trust her one bit. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. Send me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for almost a year. When I met him, he already had a very big group of best friends. One of them was this girl. There's actually another girl in the group, but my boyfriend and this particular girl, let's call her Lacey. Lacey is completely obsessed with my boyfriend. I tell him all the time, but he doesn't want to listen to me. She goes out of her way to spend time with him, and she'll do girlfriend things for him. Sometimes she'll call him and say, "I cooked us dinner, come over to my apartment." She even goes to his apartment and helps him do laundry. Let me go back. back though. When we started dating, he asked me not to be uncomfortable and that him and her were only good friends. But as soon as I saw them with each other, it was visible that she was in love with him. When he first brought me around to meet his friends, she was super territorial. She would sit next to him and even sat on his lap in front of me. And this made my boyfriend uncomfortable. He asked her to sit on a chair instead of his lap. After that, I asked him if he had feelings for her and he said no. He said he's only ever seen her as a sister, that the thought of hooking up with her makes him want to vomit. Lacey reached out to me and asked me to have lunch with her. Throughout the whole lunch, all she talked about was my boyfriend, how amazing he is, and how only a good girl deserves him. Part 2 is up. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I don't trust her. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. I was sending me on Instagram. When her and I went to lunch, all she talked about was my boyfriend. That's when she started saying things like, he only deserves a really good girl. That's when I was straight up with her. I told her that he had already chosen me because he loved me and that I didn't need her to tell me what my boyfriend needed. You guys should have seen the look on this girl's face. She was shocked that I would defend myself and even talk back to her. Then she said, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. I told her that I didn't feel bad and that I knew what she was doing. She was basically trying to intimidate me and make me feel that I wasn't good enough for my boyfriend. She denied it and started apologizing. But at least I made it clear to her that I was not stupid and that she was not going to walk all over me like she probably did with all of his exes. By the way, one of his past girlfriends actually broke up with her because of this girl. I mean, Lacey. Found this out through one of the other friends. They told me that I needed to be careful with her. And that's why I was prepared to go to lunch with her. Guess what happened though? I called my boyfriend to say hi to him and that's when he starts yelling at me. He said Lacey called him to tell him that I had attacked her at lunch. That I basically threatened her. I explained to him what happened from my point of view, and he said that she was probably just overreacting. But it was her word against mine. Part 3 is up. My boyfriend is moving in with his girl best friend and I do not trust her. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. After Lacey told my boyfriend that I had attacked her and threatened her, he told me to keep my distance. So I did. But that meant that he would hang out with her without me. I found this completely unacceptable. That's when I told my boyfriend that she was manipulative, that she had clearly planned everything out so that he and her could be alone. Then I told him that his ex-girlfriend left him because of her. He told me that I didn't know the full story and that I should mind my own business. That's when I noticed that he wouldn't come over to my apartment every day. And guess why? His best friend Lacey told him that she had a stalker and that she needed my boyfriend to stay over her house so that she could feel protected and safe. I just can't. I told him that she was clearly manipulating him and probably lying about the stalker situation so that he could spend more time with her. And just like that, 2 days later, he told me that they were moving in together and that she miraculously found an apartment big enough for the two of them. In 2 days? I don't think so. I think she had been planning this the whole time. And my boyfriend is just stupid enough to fall for it. I told him if he moved in with her that he should just forget about me. He begged me not to leave him, so I guess I'm still his girlfriend. He's still debating whether or not to move in with her. He says he doesn't want to lose me, but he wants to be able to be there for her. I think I should break up with him, but maybe there's another solution. What do you guys think I should do? Story time about how I was accused of sexually harassing my coworker. This is my story time. I did post this yesterday, but it was like 5 minutes long, so here we are. Back in 2018, I had just gotten married and my best friend was working at a company called S3 in New York City. I was so excited to get this job, you guys. I was so broke at the time. Before that, I had worked as everything. I was an assistant, maid, served at like 20 different restaurants, worked at the strip club, and I did a whole slew of other things. This job paid me $8,000 a month. It was amazing. Like, I thought I was set for life. The job was pretty simple and it was really stress-free. I had to make phone calls and sell a financial app, and I was pretty good at it. Like I said, my best friend got me this job and it was really nice because I got to hang out with her every single day at work. Now, my desk was next to somebody called Justin. Justin was one of the salespeople at the company. I heard from a few people that before I got there, Justin was not the friendliest. He wouldn't make jokes or laugh. But after I got there, his attitude completely changed. To be honest, I had fun with him and he was a great coworker. But of course, that was it. I didn't see him as anything else other than a coworker. He and I would make jokes all the time, talked about music and movies. He would talk to me about his dating life, and I would give him advice. This man either had really strong feelings for me, or he really hated me, because he ended up getting me fired. Part 2 is story time about how I was accused of sexual harassment and I got fired for it. This is my personal story time, by the way. The villain of the story, named Justin, he and I got along really well, and I sat next to him every single day at work. By the way, Justin was the youngest guy out of the entire company. Everyone else was middle-aged white men, while me and my best friend are beautiful and young and gorgeous. As you can imagine, we got stared at a lot. To be honest, this didn't really bother me because I've been stared at a lot in life. But when you find out what happened, it's infuriating. Walking down the street doing this voiceover. This is how badly I want to post this. The owner of the company is Bob. Bob and I got along really well. You see, I thought I was taken seriously in this workplace. I thought that I had value. But of course, apparently to these older white men, I did not. Today I get home from work and I get a message from Gabe, my manager. I don't like Gabe. Gabe told me not to come into work. And the following day, he tells me not to come into work again. Can you see how this would freak anyone out? I had a really bad feeling. Serena had no idea what was going on. If she did, she would tell me. This girl had my back always. Part 3 will be up soon. Story time about how I was accused of sexually harassing my coworker and got fired for it. This is my personal story time. Well, when I was told for the second time not to come into work, I was completely freaked out. Serena, who got me the job, asked me to meet her at Central Park. I had a bad feeling. Can you guys believe that S3 asked my best friend to fire me? They didn't have the balls to do it themselves because they knew that what they were firing me for was completely unfair. I get to Central Park and Serena tells me that they fire me. By the way, another coworker was there. His name was Jason. By the way, Jason had the same job as Serena and I and got paid a lot more. Inequality does exist. Went into a depression. I was anxious, was afraid, didn't know what had happened. Emailed the company asking what happened and they didn't want to tell me. Anyway, a couple of months later, I find out that Justin had gotten me fired. He told the boss that I was offering him blowjobs. By the way, when I got fired, Justin offered me financial help, pretended to be my friend. What an asshole. Story time about how my boyfriend is bullying me into losing weight. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. My boyfriend and I have been together for 2 months. He's a personal trainer, so he's really into fitness. When we started dating, I wasn't super fit, but I definitely was toned. Unfortunately, I got the Rona, so I got fired from my job because I couldn't work for 2 weeks. I was super sick and I really became depressed. I basically sat on my couch for those 2 weeks and ate a lot. Before I knew it, I had gained 7 pounds. When I finished my quarantine, I finally was able to see my boyfriend. And when he first came into my house to see me, he looked shocked. He looked me up and down and said, "Did you gain weight?" I said, "Yeah, I probably gained like 7 or 10 pounds. And then he asked me how I could let myself go like that. I told him I was totally by myself, cooped up in my apartment, and I had nothing else to do but eat. And that's when he said, and I quote, "Well, we need to get you back into the gym to get you in shape again, because I don't want a fat girlfriend." I laughed because I thought for sure he's joking, but then he said, "Stop laughing, it's not a joke." My stomach sank and I felt like I was gonna poop my pants. I started to cry and he told me that I shouldn't be a baby, that he's allowed to be honest with me about stuff like this because it has to do with him being attracted to me. So in other words, he wasn't attracted to me anymore. That's when he went into my room, picked out a pair of leggings and a sweatshirt, told me to get dressed, and took me straight to the gym. He made me exercise for an hour and a half. Instead of getting upset about it, I decided to just take it in stride and go with it. I thought maybe I can get in the best shape of my life now that I have a trainer boyfriend. As we were working out, he kept commenting on my thighs. He said that they needed to have a gap and that instead of being muscular, I was super soft. Again, I started to cry. Part 2 is up. Part 2 of how my boyfriend is bullying me into losing weight. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. After he told me that I was soft at the gym, I started to cry again. I told him that I needed to be more sensitive towards my feelings and that I didn't want to be in a relationship if he was going to be like this toward me. That's when he said that he didn't want to be in a relationship with me because I had gained weight and that's not what he had signed up for. That's when he told me I needed to look around and see all the fit women in the gym and that he could have any of those girls. I was in utter shock. I just couldn't believe that he was talking to me like that and I had never seen that side of him before. The more I cried, the angrier he got, but finally he said, "Okay, I'm sorry. Let's just do 20 minutes on the Stairmaster." That's when I told him I didn't want to work out anymore. Mind you, he had already had me at the gym for an hour and a half. That's when he said, "Fine, I'll take you home, but I'm coming back to the gym." The whole way home, he stayed quiet and gave me the cold shoulder while I cried. He pulled up to my house and I got out of the car and he literally sped away as fast as he could. He proceeded to give me the cold shoulder for the next 2 days. I finally broke and texted him telling him we needed to speak. That's when he said we could talk at the gym. I agreed and he went to pick me up. But the first thing he wanted to do at the gym was put me on a scale and weigh me. I told him absolutely not. Part 3 is up. Part 3 of how my boyfriend is bullying me into losing weight. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It was sent to me on Instagram. He was trying to force me to get on the scale so that he could weigh me because he wanted to see how much weight I could lose in 1 week. I kept saying no, but then he said fine. Then he handed me a piece of paper and said, "Here's the diet I want you to follow for the next 4 weeks." I grabbed the piece of paper and just put it in my purse. Then he has the audacity to get mad at me for not even looking at the diet. He said that I was disrespectful and that I didn't even look at the diet and that it took him hours to write all of that out. And then he said the thing that crushed my heart. He would be embarrassed to take me around his friends and family with the way that I looked. As soon as he said that, I ran out of the gym and walked home. Of course, he followed me and told me to get in the car, but I refused. I finally got to my house and he called me. I told him I needed some time away from him and that his behavior was extremely toxic. And that if I didn't have a problem with my weight, neither should he. That's when he said that he was accustomed to only being with girls that were super fit and even had abs. He told me that at first he wasn't convinced if he should date me, but I had a really pretty face. And that he was willing to overlook the fact that I wasn't super fit. He's a total narcissist, but I'm still in love with him. I tried to break up with him, but he said no. And he's still insisting that we just go to the gym together at least. I don't even know how to respond to him. What should I say? Story time about how my father is obsessed with me. Disclaimer, this is not my story time. It's sending me on Instagram. And trigger warning. My mom and dad had me when they were very, very young. My mom was 14 years old when she got pregnant with me. From what my mom told me, my parents were pretty much together throughout the whole pregnancy. Even though they were both in high school, they wanted to move in together and try to raise me like a regular family. But my maternal grandmother had a very big issue with this. She wanted my mom to continue going to high school and possibly even give me up for adoption. But my mom was not having it, so she decided to move out with my dad. Once I was born, unfortunately, my parents just couldn't take care of me. My dad was too busy playing his football and trying to get a scholarship. And my mom just didn't really know how to take care of a child. I mean, she was a child herself. This is when my grandmother stepped in and decided to take me in, which I thank God for every single day of my life. My grandmother raised me as her own daughter, and she has been the most amazing woman in my entire life. My parents split up, and through most of my childhood, I lived with my mom and my grandmother. I didn't see my dad for about 10 years. By the time I saw him again, I was 15 years old. Part 2 is a story time about how my father is obsessed with me. Disclaimer, is not my story time, it's that I mean on Instagram. And trigger warning. I finally saw my father again when I was 15 years old. From the moment he saw me, he wanted to hug me and kiss me all the time. At first, I thought it was normal because he's my father and he hadn't seen me in over 10 years. After a few weeks of him coming to visit me, I started feeling really strange. This was also around the time where I was getting noticed by boys in school. And you know that feeling you get when you know a guy likes you? Well, that's the feeling I started getting from my own father. Every time he touched me, it was like too touchy. And every kiss was just strange. One of the things that really started to bother me was that he liked going to the beach, and he wanted to make it a thing. He would always say, let's go to the beach on the weekend, but I didn't feel comfortable with him. First off, he never invited my mom to come or my grandma, so it was always just me and him. He even took me shopping for bikinis, and this is when my stomach dropped. At the bikini shop, he asked for small bikinis, like the type that show a lot of skin. Told him I wasn't comfortable with that. I wanted a bathing suit. He said no and bought me a thong bikini. He stared at me all day at the beach. Part 3 is up. Storytime about how my father is obsessed with me, part 3. After he bought me the thong bikini and forced me to wear it at the beach, I noticed he was staring at me. I wrapped myself in a towel and told him I wanted to leave. After that, I told my mom and my grandma how I felt about my dad. They thought that I was exaggerating, but I knew that I wasn't. My mom asked him to never ever do anything like that again, and he said he wouldn't. After that, he would always do certain things, like stare at me too much, or always want to hug me and kiss me. And for my own comfort and safety, I put a lot of space between him and I. When I was 18, I finally got my first boyfriend. He became enraged when my mom told him. He told my mom that I was acting like a slut. That's when I cut him out completely from my life. A year later, I got on Instagram, and that's when he started following me there. He started leaving strange comments on all my pictures, and eventually he started offering me money to spend more time with him. I told him I wasn't comfortable with him. That's when he told me that all he wanted to do was watch me take a bath, and that he would pay me thousands if I let him. My grandmother and my mom have completely cut him out of our lives. On the day of my wedding, we hired security to keep him away. And of course, he managed to show up, but security kicked him out. I'm thinking I should get a restraining order. Luckily, my mental health hasn't suffered too much from this. He's obviously an unwell person, but I actually feel really bad for him. And I feel like getting a restraining order is just going to make things worse. What the heck should I do? Bye. My fiance does not know that my ex pays for my bills and my student loans. Am I the asshole for not telling him? After my crazy toxic relationship with my ex, he promised he would always help me financially. So in 2020, when I lost my job, I hit him up and he sent me money right away. He sent me $10,000 to start with. I paid bills and some of my student loans off, and 3 months later I asked him for another 10 grand. But he actually sent me 30 instead. This held me over for almost a full year. This was right around the time that I met my now fiance. When my fiance and I started dating, of course I was not going to tell him that my ex was paying for my stuff. He just assumed that I had money saved up. Luckily last year, I did get rehired at my old job, but with a pay cut. When my fiance and I moved in together, I asked him if he could pay most of the rent, and he said no. He said he was only able to pay for half of the rent, and he literally splits everything. This man even makes me split the cost of toilet paper. I get a Venmo request from him almost every single day every time he buys something. I'm trying not to let it bother me, but at the same time, is he going to be able to support me when I'm pregnant? I asked him if he would be willing to help me financially. He said no. Part 3 is up. My fiance doesn't know that my ex is paying for my student loans and my bills. Am I the asshole for not telling him? That's when I asked my fiance if he could help me out financially. This man said no. I was actually shocked. I started to cry and I told him exactly what I thought. First off, he makes me split everything and never invites me out to dinner. Like, never offers to pay for anything. Even if I wanted like a cookie or something at Starbucks, he doesn't pay for that. I have offered to pay for things for him. Sometimes I'll buy dinner for us on the way home and I don't ask him to pay me. I was really close to confessing to him that my ex was paying for a lot of stuff for me. But that's when my fiance told me that he just thinks it's fair for me to pay for my own things. I asked him, what about when I'm pregnant? What if I can't work? He says that I can just pay for my stuff with my own savings. Then I asked him if he would be able to pay for all the kids' things. He said no, that I would have to pay for exactly half of the kids' things. And I know what you're thinking. The fact that we didn't have this conversation before we got engaged is crazy. Now I really want to tell him about my ex. And I'm even thinking about getting back with my crazy ex. My fiance is just so blah now to me. Like, I can't even look at him the same way anymore. I know I'm not being unreasonable. It's not like I'm asking him to pay for everything. What should I do? Am I the asshole for wanting to expose my lying, cheating mother? A month ago, I borrowed my mom's phone and she had no idea, but I looked at all of her apps and found that she was cheating with multiple men. I'm 26 years old and my parents have now been married for 30 years. I actually got separated when I graduated from high school, but then they got back together a few years later. My mom has always been the one that wants to separate my dad, but he keeps wanting to get back together with her. My dad is actually in love with this woman. He adores her. He does everything for her. He's super affectionate with her, loves to take her out on dates, gives her so much of his time, and she still doesn't appreciate it. I've always been closer to my dad than my mom. My mom's always trying to find an excuse to go party with her friends, but now I know why. Like I said, I ended up borrowing her phone, and she probably didn't expect me to go snooping. And honestly, it wasn't even my intention. I'm scrolling on her phone and I see the app Tinder. I nearly fell out of my seat. So I quickly scrolled through everything and started taking pictures. My mom was sending nudes to random men. Part 2 is up. Am I the asshole for wanting to expose my lying, cheating mother? That's when I saw that she was sending nudes to men on different apps. Not only was she on Tinder, she was also on Bumble and an app for older people. Mind you, my father is still in love with this woman. I managed to take pictures of everything on the apps. Here's the worst part. Start going through her messages and that's when I found that she has a boyfriend. At that point, I didn't know how long they'd been together. Now I know that she's been with him for 6 months. So every single time she goes on her weekend trips with her friends, she's actually with her boyfriend. And get this, she uses my dad's money to pay for everything. An entire week passed before I confronted her. First, I didn't know how to confront her, but I had to just do it. Every time I saw my dad, I would start to cry and he was worried about me. I didn't have the heart to tell my dad until I confronted my mom. I went up to her and I showed her all the receipts I had. So she got pissed at me for looking through her phone. By the way, at this point, I'm still living with my parents. That's when she threatened to kick me out of the house if I told my dad anything. My own mother threatening me. Then she tried to smack me across the face, so I smacked her. Part 3 is up. Am I the asshole for wanting to expose my lying, cheating mother? After she slapped me, I slapped her back. And I slapped her so hard she actually fell on the floor. I instantly felt bad and tried to apologize. That's when she started to cry and I started to cry. I asked her to just be honest with me and tell me the truth. She told me that she wasn't in love with my dad anymore, but that she felt bad for him because he was still in love with her. And that she'd been dating this new guy for 6 months. She even confessed that she was addicted to going on dating apps and flirting with men. That's when I told her she needed to tell my dad. That she needed to stop using his money to take her boyfriend out. Then another confession. She had spent over $25,000 on hotels that she would book for her and her new boyfriend. And apparently this guy was broke. He couldn't pay for himself. She tried to negotiate with me. If I don't tell my dad, she'd break up with her boyfriend and stop using the apps. I mean, she's my mother and I don't want to cause her pain, but it's my dad. I ended up telling her that I wouldn't tell my dad. But 2 nights ago, my dad went on a work trip. My mom is so stupid she actually snuck in her boyfriend through her window. I heard them doing the dirty all night. And now she's begging me again not to tell my dad. I'm planning on telling my dad tonight. I'll have to keep you guys updated. Give me advice.